will do, Jeremy.
Good job.
Yeah. I introduce myself, Fergus Cleary, Convoy. Are we all set, Jeremy?
We're good to go.
Right, okay. Fergus Cleary, born and bred in Convoy. And indeed, on that subject, I remember a newspaper reporter coming to interview me, a very efficient lady, and she crossed the legs on a notebook and pencil, and she says, "Well now, Mr. Cleary, have you lived all your life in Convoy?" Well, not yet. Not yet. I don't know how I thought of that answer so soon, but it's safe to say at this stage that I have lived most of my life in Convoy. I was born in Donegal, down to the north side of the village, and then when we were 7 we moved to Craigdhu on the south side. Now that really was rural living at its best. Clay roads, no tar, bicycles, and a pretty long way for a 7-year-old to have to walk to Broadpath National School. But I enjoyed my time at school. In that school there was an immense amount of time teaching religion. And in the religion catechism, it was called then, there was a huge chapter on alcohol. And you had to learn all these questions of, what are the signs of alcohol upon the human body? And you'd answer, red faces, blotched noses, and stumbling gait and general demoralisation. And then the next one would be, what are the effects of alcohol upon the human mind? It weakens the will, renders the person unfit to look after their business, and sometimes leads to madness. And the priest came to examine them all for confirmation, and he picked out this big fella at the back and he says, "Now, child, what is matrimony?" And he gets up and he says, "Please, Father, it weakens the will, renders the person unfit to look after their business, and sometimes leads to madness." He got making his first communion anyway. The priest didn't disagree with him. Aye. And then, of course, we were sent to secondary school, myself and my brother. My parents were both school teachers, and they were academically inclined, and they wanted us to pass the leaving certificate, which I did with not many marks to spare, mind you. And after that then it was time to get my first job. Selling ice cream out of a van to shops all round the Fanad and Rosgull peninsulas. I remember the first day very well. Cold, wet day towards the end of April. And there was nobody interested in ice cream at all. I came back to the yard with just about as much ice cream on the vehicle as it was. And the old store man, he opened the door and he looks into the van and he looked at me and he looked in again. "Tell me this, son," he says, "were you buying or selling today?" He says, "Welcome home after your first day's work." It was only a summer job anyway. And that was 1959. And there was nothing for it then but the emigrant boat. And I worked for about 15 months in Manchester, conducting buses. But then the next spring found me back here conducting buses, mainly out of Stranorder, into Derry in the morning, and back to Derry, and then out to Portnew through Glenfin in the evening. I enjoyed it very much. We did a big trade in day-old chickens at that time. They all came down on the bus from Sligo, and they'd be changed then to the bus for Portnew or Letterkenny or Strabane. And indeed, the poor day-old chicks, they were quite exhausted by the time they got to Ballybofey. And there was an old man owned the cafe where the buses used to stop. And he took those chickens in there and he opened every single box and fed them with meal and water. When you were in there in the cafe, you had to be careful with your feet in case you would tramp on the day-old chicks. I don't know what the health and safety people would think of it now, but he was a kind old man, you know, parcelled them all up again, ready for another trip. There was a woman on the bus one time, and she said to me, "Do you like the job?" "Oh, aye." I says, "Oh," she was a curious lady. Asked me a lot of questions and discovered that she knew my father. And then she says, "Would you not think of going in and doing psychiatric nursing?" Hadn't occurred to me, but there came a telegram the following January. That was only a temporary job too, the buses, you see. By October I was gone. And the following January there came a telegram requesting me to report for temporary duty as a student psychiatric nurse. And that's how it happened to come about that on the 28th of January 1962, frosty Sunday morning. I reported in there at 7 a.m. for the position of student psychiatric nurse. You were just, you hit the ground running. You were thrown in, open those doors down there, help them to put the clothes on them. These days, student nurses might spend up to 12 weeks in the regional college or someplace like that before they set foot in a ward at all. Not then. You got into it, and any lectures you got, they were delivered at night time, after your 12-hour day. All about schizophrenia and neurosis and psychosis and delusions and hallucinations, different types of phenothiazine tablets and barbiturates, and a myriad of stuff that I kind of forget now, you know. But about that place, one of the things that struck me very early was the walls that surrounded the place. Big, high walls that stood 8 feet high at least, and incredibly strong and incredibly well built. And on top of the walls, bits of glass all the way around, bottles, broken plates, cups, anything they could find. And they were embedded in there, and as if that weren't enough, concrete iron posts stuck into the walls at different, and barbed wire slung round in circular fashion. Anybody looking at it would conclude that whoever was contained in there would have constituted a serious threat to the public. In 98% of the cases, that was, nothing could be further from the truth. And recently, I decided to go, just walk around the walls to see if they still existed. They're gone now on the west side and on the south side due to building housing estates and road development. On the east side, they're still there, but in a much modernised and lowered form. But go to the north side, and there's a good 150 or 200 metres still in its original condition. Covered in ivy now, of course, but go to the northeast corner, and the bits of glass and the posts and the decaying barbed wire are all still there, plainly to be seen. And the only way in and out then was the main gate. And that closed at about a quarter to 12 at night. The student nurses didn't think much of this, or nurses, because they used to be out till dances till about 2 o'clock in the morning. So you used to have to help them over the gate. You helped the girls over the gate, quite a big high gate, and then climb over it yourself and hope that the aristocracy wouldn't catch you at it, you see. And then the girls might invite you in for a drop of tea in the kitchen, and you'd sit there talking till about 4 in the morning, go to bed and rise again at a quarter to 7 for another 12-hour day. But still, they were enjoyable times, you know. But most of the time I wasn't coming back from dancing at the dances. I was coming back from playing music at the dances. And throughout all my nursing career, I did 44 years permanent, I continued to play with the show bands for as long as they lasted. The show bands were a unique thing to Ireland, you know. It didn't happen anywhere else. I don't know how it started. In the old days, the dance orchestras, as they were known, played their music sitting down on big music stands and read their music out of sheet paper, and no attempt whatsoever was made to make contact with the dancers, except perhaps by the lead singer or the MC. And then a band from Strabane decided to throw away all this stuff, the music stands, and played their music standing up. And they were the first in Ireland to introduce microphones. This, of course, improved the singing quality of the singers. And they threw away the black suits and they wore bright blue. And they called themselves the Clipper Carlton Show Band. It was an instant success. It took off immediately. And other bands were very quick to realise that this was the way to go. And before 2 years, Ireland was show band crazy. There was dancing every night of the week. Cars and minibuses crossed going to the dances and back in the small hours of the morning, and everybody would have had their own favourite show band and would have travelled for miles to hear their own favourite show band. Money poured into the pockets of the hall owners and indeed parish priests in many cases for the parish, and consequently into the pockets of the young musicians who played in these show bands. And I would say it's a safe bet to assume that those young lads that played in the Irish show bands, in the top 15 or so Irish show bands professionally, must have ranked them among the best paid musicians in the world. Some of them were, a few of them were sensible, you know, but there were a lot of harum-scarum lads in it, you know. Drunk, smoked, bought fancy cars, fancy suits, and went with whatever woman took their fancy. Just that was it. But some of them were sensible enough, you know. And the death knell of that era came around the early 70s. By that time, it was becoming more acceptable for girls to go into public houses. And with the continued insistence by the clergy and by the dance hall owners that absolutely no alcohol of any kind be sold in these places, boyfriend and girlfriend tended to go into the pub first, and then they might go to the dance. But as time went on, they went into the pub and they felt so cosy that they stayed in the pub. And of course the music followed them in there. The big 7-piece outfits were being dismantled now, and smaller 2- and 3-piece outfits were being formed to go in and play in the more confined areas of the pub, or singing lounge as they were known at the time. It was, at least it was earlier work. You got finished at 11:30, earlier than coming at 3:30 and pushing the nurses over the gate. And there was an old fellow in the hospital. He used to question me regularly about that activity, about pushing the nurses over the gate. Many did you push over last night? Oh, 3 of them. Look at that, and he'd think away about that, you know. Imagine it. But it was sexual segregation made him like that, you know. He was never in contact with a female from the day he was admitted to that place, back in the early days. Same for them all, same for all the girls. No contact with the opposite sex. There's the male side, there's the female side, and there's the locked door in the middle, and never the twain shall meet. Never the twain shall meet. Indeed, there was a man and his sister in that hospital for more than 15 years each, and one didn't know the other was in the same institution for that length of time. By today's standards, that would be considered to be scandalous nursing practice. But not then. You just got on with it. Not allowed, just custodial attitude and keep them from doing any harm to themselves or anybody else. Of course, there were enlightened things. There were occupational therapy was starting at that time, and garden centres and these kind of things, cutting the lawn. They were kept busy. There was no domestic staff, only 2 girls when I came, and their duties were confined to the main kitchen, never anywhere else. The rest was down to us and the patients to do all the work, serve the fruit, wheel it down there in trolleys, putting around turf. It was all turf fires those days, which was a mess too. There was turf, mould and smoke everywhere. That's how it went. There was all kinds of people there. Young, old, intelligent, not so intelligent. Oh, there was intelligent people admitted to mental hospitals all over the world. There was a fellow one time, I wonder do I remember this poem he wrote. He wanted to get home and the psychiatrist wouldn't let him home. So he put pen to paper. "O great psychiater, with the onyx eyes and olangelius exterior, expert in motifs subalterior, grotesque guessmaster, seer and sage so wise, colossal conjurer of latent lies, delusions make thy life the cheerier. Truth travestied, thou'lt seldom wearier with much attention, save by suave surmise. Science of semblance and shock blackmail, delusions for detention made the cause." Delusions, it's a long time since I recited it. "Consumptive dog, being fed upon its tail, faeces of gossips, meretricious maws, conclusions based on sophistry so stake in jitters of God's justice and his laws. Semblances of suavity and sweet blackmail. Poor pilloried self-sacrificing saint, born radiating reason and restraint. with preaching and its practice all amaze. Ungrateful gowls his patience, so he says, refusing to remain as he would paint, ransacking for redress without a taint of thankfulness, contentedness, or praise. Martyr self-styled, we confiscate thy crown. Perhaps thou gettest less than what thou gave. Ours, agony of anguish, underground, immured alive here in this ghostly grave, and thine, thy remorse, while pangs of conscience pound for crashing a career and christening a slave. I hope there's no psychiatrists here that. But it shows you the brain some people had. It was a house of great contrast, you know. Tactics all the way, a time to speak and a time to remain silent, a time to criticise, a time to praise, a time for learning new lessons and unlearning old lessons.